So one of the most important elements of the golf swing is how far away we stand from the golf ball. And that will have a huge impact on how you move throughout the golf swing. We discuss this with tour pros as well as beginning golfers, because once this gets off, the swing becomes infinitely more difficult. We're going to talk about the proper distance from the ball based on stance width. We're also going to discuss hip depth, the forward bend you should have, as well as where the arms should be to create that perfect distance for you from the golf ball. All right, so building the proper distance from the ball includes the proper stance width. Like we see this violated a lot with golfers, where some players will come in too wide, right? I see a lot of these guys butt back, really reaching for it. And then we have some guys that'll come in way too narrow, especially with the driver, and it's more of an upright swing, and then they create a very poor vertical swing plane coming down from themselves. So let's talk about how to tell for you what the right width is to your stance.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot in lessons when golfers come in not really knowing how far to stand as far as their feet are apart. And we like to use the hips as a reference point instead of the shoulders.
Right. Why is that?
Because your feet are attached, your legs are attached to your hips, not your shoulders. And I think using that as a reference point, you want your feet just outside the width of your hips so that you can have this A-frame, we call it, which assists with kind of the weight shift and the movement during the swing.
So for all normal link shots or stock shots, we'll call it, short game's a little different.
Yep.
You're going to have some angle to your outsides of each leg. And you don't want it too wide. You certainly don't want it too narrow. That's going to enable you, as you start shifting and moving dynamically in the swing, to create some bracing there when that happens.
Exactly. Driver will be just a little bit wider.
Right.
Iron's not quite as wide, like Mike said, short game a little narrow.
Right. All right, so this is one that we see give golfers fits for how far they build their comfort level or their familiarity with how far they should stand to the golf ball. And it's how deep they position their hips relative to the golf ball.
Yeah, huge deal. We don't like to see the center of the hips get way back behind the heels here.
Right.
Kids are deaf, right?
Well, yeah, we don't like seeing that because we know what that's going to create, which is the early extension in the backswing and even more in the downswing.
Yeah, so if I set up, sitting back on the bar stool in the chair, 10 times out of 10, that golfer comes in towards the ball on the backswing.
Yeah, so if I'm set up to this golf ball here and I have my butt, I start by sitting on that bar stool and my hands are out here. That's my distance from the ball. I've got no chance to keep any of those relationships when I'm in the golf swing, and it's going to hurt me as the speed starts to increase.
Exactly right.
So where do we want the pelvis?
So we want the hips less back and the center of the hips kind of over the ankle.
So, and a good visual for that is just to look at your pant seam or short seam. You want the top of that short seam by his hip joint just to be over the ankle. And it's an easy way to tell that when you're filming your golf swing.
Yeah, and so to do it right, I would just kind of bend forward, feel like I'm going to fall over, and just crack my knees. At no time am I bending forward and pushing my butt back.
That's what's so unique to this with what we see golfers. Okay, we'll say, all right, just bend forward from the hips. And what everybody does is throw the hips back to bend forward. And that's not what you want to do. It makes you rock to your heels when that happens. So yeah, feel like my front of my feet are really gripping the ground. Then I crack my knees, and that's in a pretty good spot. So again, this is the very beginning of how far you should be standing. And each of you are going to be a little different based on your anatomy. Some of you have long arms, short arms. This will take all that into account. Before we move on, I want to highlight something that Shaun did and demonstrated that often gets overlooked. And that's the concept of bending the knees back versus bending the knees forward. The knee bend you see Shaun making here on the left is an example of what we call bending the knees back. It's something we see amateur golfers do every single day. And to see what I mean by that, notice how his shins are coming up vertically straight out of his ankles. So any knee bend he has from here will move his pelvis back behind his heels. And this is something you want to try your best to avoid while you're setting up, is this backwards knee bend, especially if you're prone to early extending or losing your spine angle during the swing. Instead, work to develop this forward knee bend, and you'll notice how that angles his shins forward instead of remaining vertical. So now instead of having the center of his pelvis behind his heels, with forward knee bend, he has the center of his pelvis over his ankles. And this forward knee bend is something you'll see from many of the best players in the world. So get yourself in front of a mirror or use your phone and find out if you have forward or backwards knee bend. And if you see your shins looking vertical with this backwards knee bend, it'll be worth the effort to retrain how you bend your knees at setup. It'll probably feel awkward at first, but you'll be giving yourself the best starting position to start your swing dynamically without having to early extend or change your spine angle. So with the proper depth to the hip and the proper stance width, right? So we got the lower body dialed in now for how far you should be from the ball. Now, how much bent over should we be? Because this is where, again, we start to see a lot of variation between AMs and pros.
Yeah, so basically, once you get bent over the fence here, crack your knees, you have to have a certain amount of forward bend to play golf because the ball's down there. You want to feel like your fingertips are just about at the top of your kneecaps with the kind of a mid-iron. That gets you in a pretty good spot. Driver, you'll be up a little taller. Short irons, obviously, you'll be bent over a little more. But if you get a good gauge, like 6-iron, 7-iron, fingertips, top of kneecaps, clap your hands together. That gives you the right amount of forward bend with your upper body.
Now, if you're 6'5", right, I'm going to have more forward bend because I'm doing the same setup with my legs than Shaun will have. So it's going to be very height dependent, whether you're long torsoed, short torsoed. Let's also talk about the neck bend, because we see a lot of golfers will bend over and have like they've got a bar squat rack across their back where their head goes up in the air and they're kind of looking down their cheeks.
Well, and that ties into having too much of an arch in the lower back. It's kind of S posture, you would call it. So basically, when you bend forward, you want to let your neck relax down so you're looking out the middle of your eyes at the ball. You don't want to have chin up so you're having to look down the bottom of your eyes. And when you bend forward from your hips, you don't want to get an arch in this back where I can put my whole hand between the shaft and my back. It's just going to be fairly flat there and a little bit of roundness toward the upper back. It's really a great position to start from, get you in a good spot to move the club away correctly.
And the roundness isn't something that you have to try to do, right? We see some golfers actually trying to have like an old man posture to do it. The roundness comes from my shoulders protracting forward as I take the grip there. Now, I'm not trying to go from here and then cancel that out and bend over and get back. So
try to do that for years. That's a disaster.
Anyway, we both were taught that for a little while. Thank goodness we just bailed on that. So with the proper hip depth, and now you know the proper amount to bend forward, just think right there, you should be pretty good to go. Now let's talk about where the arms should be. The last piece of the puzzle is where the arms need to be to create this perfect setup. And this is going to apply to all clubs in the bag. And we basically, from your good hip posture, forward bend posture, just let your arms hang. That's where they should be.
Exactly.
The key word is there is hang.
Yeah, you just kind of get your fingertips, top of your kneecaps, clap your hands together, grip it, and get your arms over top of your chest. If you're a little bigger chested, it's too hard to play when you pull your arms off to the side.
Right.
So get them over the top, let them hang, fairly straight. Not like loose ropes, really. Maybe put a little pressure into them, but they should be pretty much down this way, not out here and not way down in here.
Right, you'll see a little bit of distance, not a ton of distance, maybe a hand's width from the butt of your club to your body.
Right, so I usually will take the hand like this with the thumb on the side. Once I get in there, I'll check that to make sure I just barely get my hand through there, and I'll point the butt of the grip somewhere up my belt buckle. I don't want it way down or way up.
Right, and we did the arm hang last because you talked about a good little check there is hands on top of the knees, but we'll see a lot of golfers, like I can get my hands on top of my knees like this, or I can get my hands on top of my knees like this. So this is kind of, once you have the body in a good spot, then make sure the hands are on top of the knees, and then that's the last piece of the puzzle. So with a good stance width that has both of your legs angling out from your hips, and with the center of your pelvis over your ankles as your arms hang down from your shoulders, this is a common distance from the ball with a 7-iron we see from the tour players in our database. And we're taking this measurement from the center of the ball to the center of the ankles. So grab a tape measure, lay it on the ground, and set one end at the center of your ankles and set the other end to the center of your 7-iron. And see if this distance from the ball feels any different than your normal distance from the ball. When golfers come in to see us, and their lesson just happens to be right after a tour player's, one of the most common things they'll say to us when the pro leaves is, I can't believe how much closer to the ball they stand than I do. Your distance from the ball should be a byproduct of doing everything we've talked about in this video to a pro level.
And the last little thing I want to mention here, once you get in there and grab the club, you feel like you got the distance from the ball, with your irons, just let your arms swing off and see if it swings back to where it started.
Right.
That gives you a perfect spot to be in as far as arm hang, and the driver usually will kind of hit right on the other hand like that because you're a little taller and a little farther away.
That's exactly right. So this is one of those setup elements of the golf swing that gets so overlooked, but has such an important effect impact on your overall golf swing. And it takes zero talent, zero physical talent to set up correctly, right? The good grip, a good setup, proper stance width, all those things should be a given, and you should own these before you ever pull the club back. When you do, give yourself a much better chance to swing properly. If you found this video helpful and you need more help with your consistency, we want to help you with that. Go to the first comment below this video. You'll see a link. It's our first pinned comment. There'll be a link in there. Click on that link. We'll take you to our #1 consistency drill to help you hit the ball more solidly and more consistent every time you're out on the course.